Hello, and thank you for clicking on this, my first, possibly only, see how it goes, YouTube video. Why am I doing this? I've decided to give this whole thing a whirl after spending months binge watching YouTubers ever since I figured out that my telly can show me YouTube. I've been so inspired by some of the amazing creators out there, particularly booktubers, and I thought I would give this a go myself. My name is Sarah, and I am a book addict. I'm not trained in the dark arts of literary criticism or anything like that. I'm just a complete hobbyist, and I love to read. So I thought I would speak to you today about the best books I have read so far this year, and I'm going to kick off with Wintering by Catherine May. I read a NetGalley of this, and then Penguin Random House kindly sent me a print copy of the finished book to say thank you, and it now sits pride of place on my bookshelves because I absolutely loved this. So Catherine May is an author. I think she's written some other memoir type books and some fiction, and she was previously like the program director, I think, of a creative writing program for a university in England, and she's done a bit of journalism, and now I think she works as a editor and talent scout, so that's quite a CV and probably explains why this book is so good. So when I came across the description of this book, I knew I had to read it. It's the story of Catherine's journey through what she terms as a winter of her life. Not the winter, a winter of her life, which she describes as a time where we have to kind of hunker down, go into ourselves and retreat in order to heal. So for Catherine, that was a period of illness and uncertainty, but it can be for other reasons like depression, grief, heartbreak, fear, and that is why this book caught my attention, because I'm going through my own winter, and I've been kind of looking for the guiding light of those who have tread the path before me. I don't think I would have used the term wintering before I read this book, but it is an absolutely perfect way to describe it, and so does Catherine's way of looking at it, not as something to be feared or avoided, but instead something to be used as a time of healing and transformation. When winter comes, much like the season itself, you can't hide from it, so the best thing to do is to embrace it. And if you can be prepared for such periods in your life, so much the better. And I kind of saw this book as like a bit of a map and a survival guide. So I thought I would just read a quick quote. Don't worry, I won't make a habit of this. I've got a couple of quotes from this particular book, but it's not something I tend to really make a note of when I'm reading. But for this one, I just thought this is a good way to sum it up. So she defines wintering as the active acceptance of sadness. It's the practice of allowing ourselves to feel it as a need. It's the courage to stare down the worst parts of our experience and to commit to healing them the best we can. Wintering is a moment of intuition, our true needs felt keenly as a knife. Which, yes, all of that. So Catherine explores the experience of wintering alongside elements of seasonal winter, nature, weather, hibernation, the feeling of cold, and traditions of particularly Nordic countries. And I thought this was a fascinating book because she's able to balance her own experiences and those of the people that she interviews with some natural history and a bit of scientific evidence as well. But it's really her writing that elevates this book. I thought it was beautiful, and it really brought the full force of like a cold wind or a crackling fire to life on the page. But mostly what really resonated with me is the encouragement that Catherine gives the reader to see even times of real emotional turmoil as a time to withdraw, heal and transform, not as an act of cowardness or selfishness, but as the natural way to cope with the ebb and flow of life. And so, one more quote is that life goes on abundantly in winter, and this is where changes are made that usher us into future glories. And that was really the key message I got from this book, that yes, I'm going through a winter in my life, but if I use it as a time to go into myself, to examine what it is I want from life, then I can use it as an opportunity to heal and come out stronger on the other side. So this book came into my life at probably the perfect moment, so I very much recommend Wintering by Catherine May. My second book on the list is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I don't know if you can see that, it's a very shiny, well protected library copy. So this is the story of a wee black girl called Piccola Breedlove, who lives a life of abuse and neglect, and all she really wants is to be beautiful, and particularly to have blue eyes. It's a pretty brutal story of the internalisation of racism, and it's the second Toni Morrison book that I've read, so after Beloved I shouldn't really have expected anything less than a gut punch. I value her writing so much, particularly as a white British person who doesn't really have any experience of the race politics in America or the experience of racism. This book to me is much broader in terms of the wealth of characters than Beloved, and in the examination of the contributing factors as to how they treat each other and the way they live their lives. There are still elements that are just as shocking and disturbing to read as there are in Beloved, but I think I'm coming to learn that that's where Toni Morrison's talent lay. She doesn't flinch from the unpalatable, but she approaches these sort of topics with a raw honesty and not just shock for shock's sake. There's always a point that she is making with them. The internalisation of racism and the impact of life experiences, particularly early life experiences, on how people treat others and themselves is at the core of this book. It's heartbreaking, but rather than making that a tough read, I actually found this quite a compelling page turner. I love how interspersed with the main story are kind of character studies of other main players or even periphery characters, which just add depth to the small universe in which the story takes place. It's a really engrossing read, and I know I need to read more Toni Morrison because her voice and the stories that she told with it are so important. So that was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. So my next book is Enduring Love by the powerhouse is Ian McEwan. This has to have one of the weirdest opening scenes in a book that I have ever read. A group of strangers are thrown together in an attempt to save a young boy from a runaway hot air balloon, and it's retold in exacting detail by the narrator Joe Rose. He's a scientific writer living quite happily with his partner Clarissa until his involvement in this botched rescue attempt attracts the attention of one of the others involved. Jed Parry is an obsessive loner and is convinced that Joe loves him, and he takes to stalking Joe, seeing every one of Joe's denials as further proof of their enduring love. And that love will lead Joe to God through Jed. Yeah, as if the balloon crash wasn't weird enough. So there are some amazing scenes in this book. The drug dealers in the farmhouse is a particular favourite of mine, and I loved the build up to the conclusion, because even as a reader I questioned what was reality and who really was suffering from psychiatric turmoil. I think that's what I really enjoyed about the book. Well, that and McEwan's prose. which I usually do enjoy. I've read about 6 of his other books, and while this is no atonement, I think this is probably one of my favourites of his, and that's even taken into account that I have really lost my appetite for kind of middle class stories. I think probably what saved this is that this isn't a rich people problem story. Everything in it that's going on is so bizarre that that is what really makes the book. So yeah, bit of a headlock this one, but Enduring Love by Ian McEwan is well worth the read. My 4th book on this list is Mallory Blackman's Noughts and Crosses. So I read this in February before I realised that there is actually a TV adaptation that's, I think it's still on. I've watched the first episode so far. I need to catch up, but yeah, it started a couple of weeks ago. I didn't know that when I read this book. I'd heard a lot about this though over the years, and the concept is so simple but totally genius. So what would the world and life for those living in it look like if we lived in a black supremacist society rather than the white one that we're all currently stuck in? And reading it was fascinating to me. It threw up so many interesting points, and something that I found quite crazy was that so many people on Goodreads have shelved this as a dystopia, when really it's so close to the experience of so many people in our society today. It's just that the colours are reversed. Reading this book should really make it more evident of how difficult it must be to live as a person of colour in this world, and I question anyone who walked away from this book without at least pausing to think on that. I don't read a lot of YA, but I'm actually really happy that this is a YA book because it doesn't shy away from the real topics and instead makes them relevant to readers at an age where their opinions are still malleable, they're not set in stone. The writing and the characters didn't really do it for me as an adult reader, but I don't really think that matters. It was still an enjoyable read, and one I feel is accessible enough for even reluctant readers. And actually this copy came off my teenage son's shelf, and he has read this, and he's not a big reader, as much as that breaks my heart. So I do think that this is, yeah, I'm glad they've adapted it to TV. Just as I mentioned, my son, he's actually just started practicing his bass, so you might be able to hear that, but it's quite a good soundtrack. So I thought I would just address, though, there is a negative. The assumption's made that the crosses on the black people would be just as awful to the white people, the noughts, as white people have been and sadly continue to be to black people in the world that we live in. And obviously I understand why Mallory Blackman made that decision, because without it there wouldn't have been a story. But it just made me sad to think like that, especially considering that in some ways the powerful crosses are worse to the noughts, because in this world slavery lasted a lot longer and segregation still exists, despite it being set in what I assume to be modern times. But maybe that says more about my naivety regarding the corruption and malice that comes with power. Maybe gaining power is the great equalizer, in that it makes those who have it act disgusting in ways to those who don't, no matter what colour their skin. That's a bit of a dreary thought, sorry. I hope not, for all our sakes. But that was just kind of how this book made me think, and I think that's what makes it such a great book, is it really does spark those things in your brain. So that was Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman, and if you're too lazy to read the book, you can always watch the TV adaptation. So my final book for this list, sorry, literally fueled by caffeine. You'll notice that if I make any other videos there will probably always be a coffee featured. But anyway, so my final pick of best books that I have read so far this year is Shrill. Oh look, still got my price ticket on it from FOP. This is Shrill by Lindy West, which is quite different from the other books on my list. So Lindy West has written for some pretty big names. I think she's written for like Cosmo, Jezebel, GQ, The Guardian. But I actually didn't really know anything about her before I read this book. But I do love a good feminist read, and I think my favourite type of feminism is that which relates the kind of highbrow feminist theory to real life and does so with like a hefty dose of humour and just a little bit of gutter talk. You may have noticed I think I might have dropped an F-bomb in here somewhere already. I don't mind a bit of swearing. And Lindy West serves up just that sort of dish, and she does so from the perspective of someone who lives in a fat body, which for me just made it even more delicious. She slays trolls and comedians who troll the trauma of rape for cheap laughs, and the nonsensical anti-abortion far right, all while remaining honest and vulnerable about who she is and what she's been through. And as a comedy fan myself, she puts into words a lot of the feelings I've had when male comics joke about things which victimise the experience of those who've been through them, and which their privilege of being male means that they will never have to experience themselves, or are less likely to experience themselves. And I know that crushing disappointment when a comedian you admire lowers himself to use shock tactics to milk laughs. And I love that she takes the stand against the "you just don't have a sense of humour" argument that's often used to silence minorities when they dare to question that approach in comedy. Like I said, I didn't know anything about Lindy West when I read this book, but actually I don't think that matters when you read it, because having read her book, I absolutely want to read more of her work, and I think she's got a lot of really important things to say. So yeah, that was Shrill by Lindy West. Thank you for bearing with me if you've made it to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've maybe found some reading recommendations while we're all social distancing through coronavirus. Let me know what you thought, but please be kind. And I'm hoping to do a few more of these because boredom really has set in with, you know, working from home and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'm hoping that this will not be my one and only YouTube video. So I'll do what everyone else does, like down there, subscribe. I don't know. But yeah, it would be nice if you would like to hang out with me more in future and give me a thumbs up. But more importantly, give me a comment so I know who you are and I can say hi back to you, and I will see you next time.